"I was a star," Pola Negri once said. A real star, one of the kind that made the word important. It would be hard to argue with this self-assessment, as Pola rose from the lowest imaginable beginnings to hold the world in her hands for a moment. Porcelain-skinned, jet-haired, and smoky-eyed, no American had ever seen a woman who looked like her on screen before, and she laid down the femme fatale archetype for the decades to come. "I was the first," she said, "and I was the best." And yet this exquisite life of pure glamour evaporated in a puff of smoke, and suddenly she was gone. So what happened to the ultimate vamp? And was she, in the end, a victim of her own thirst for the spotlight? This is the life of the mysterious, exotic, and utterly bewitching Pola Negri. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Pola's early life is as hard to piece together as the fragments of some of her partially lost films. So much has been lost to history, or in many cases buried under her own exaggerated claims. Her birth date has long been a topic of debate. Some sources claim she was born in 1894, while others suggest 1899 or 1901. The story the studio spun when she arrived in Hollywood was that she was the last child born in the 19th century, arriving at the stroke of midnight on the 31st of December, 1899. This certainly added to her aura of coming from another darker and more romantic world. Pola, on the other hand, admitted, "My birth date has gotten later and later over the years. A lady's prerogative, I believe." However, most now agree that she entered the world on January 3rd, 1897. But the mysteries don't end there. She weaved a whole labyrinth of wild tales about her upbringing. Here's an amalgamation of the most probable and most often repeated claims. She was born with the name of Barbara Apollonia Halupiec in either a village named Janowa or more probably in the town of Lipno, in what was known as the Congress State of Poland, to Juraj and Eleonora Halupiec. This state was a semi-autonomous region of what is modern Poland today, and it had been ceded to the Russian Empire by the French after France was defeated in the Napoleonic Wars back in 1815. The region was technically quite liberal and independent. However, in reality, the Russian Tsars did not much respect the legal restrictions on their powers, and it was little more than a Russian puppet state. Life was, unsurprisingly, hard for Poles under these conditions, and Pola's family were no exception. Her father Juraj was an itinerant Romani Slovak tinsmith who was arrested by Russian Tsarist authorities and deported to Siberia. Pola claimed that he was an active revolutionary who had been captured after fighting Hungarian and Austrian forces as a volunteer in the fight to liberate Slovakia. Her mother, Eleonora, was a washerwoman and now had to raise her family alone. Not only that, but the Russian authorities, so Pola remembered, launched a vindictive attack on Pola and her mother. Her father was what in those days would have been termed a gypsy, and so was extremely unlikely to receive anything resembling a fair trial. The Russians sequestered all of their belongings, and then proceeded to burn their house down, with the young girl and her mother watching on helplessly. And this all took place before the trial had even commenced. Once Juraj had been sent to his doom in Siberia, mother and daughter left Janowa and headed for the capital of the Congress, Warsaw. Here, Pola's mother worked as a cook, and they lived in a building that was notorious for its role as a local brothel. But rather than be intimidated, Pola was fascinated by these ladies of the night, and she soon developed her own acute sensual nature, as well as a penchant for glamorous attire and outrageous behavior. While these beginnings are about as unlikely as could be imagined for a prospective major Hollywood movie star, Pola always claimed her family was of lost nobility. Her mother's side, she always maintained, were Polish nobles who lost everything after they sided with Napoleon against the Russians. A heroic and tragic drama that would conclude with the lost Princess Pola being reborn in the latest mighty empire to take over the world, Hollywood. A tall tale indeed, and in all probability a long way from the truth. But the reality of her humble origins only serves to make Pola's rise even more extraordinary. One way out of poverty for a physically fit and attractive young woman in Eastern Europe back then was to dance your way to the top. And that is exactly what Pola did, deciding to embark on the grueling and demanding life of a professional ballerina. Around 1910, she studied at the Imperial Ballet School in St. Petersburg, one of the greatest ballet schools in the world. She danced brilliantly, performing in Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, and then in her first solo role, she took on Arthur Saint Leon's Coppelia. But while her looks, work ethic, and ability certainly fit the bill, her health altogether was another story. Like so many people of that era, she contracted tuberculosis while she was at the school, a disease which claimed staggering numbers of victims, both young and old. She was forced to take 3 months away in a sanatorium in Zakopane, southern Poland, and never fully recovered. Her ballet dream was dead. She also never recovered from this immense disappointment. Later, when she was fabulously wealthy in Hollywood, she said, "I would be willing to trade places with the poorest ballet dancer in the world." Her spell in the sanatorium did bring one important thing to her life: a new name. Inspired by her reading the works of Italian poet Pola Negri, she shortened Apolloniona to Pola and was henceforth known to the world as Pola Negri. Her aspirations of becoming a ballet dancer may have failed, but new chances for stage performances awaited her. In 1912, she enrolled in the Philharmonia Drama School in Warsaw. This decision set her on the road to an acting career, though it came with major disapproval from her mother, who thought she was still too fragile. To avoid her mother's scrutiny, she gave the school her stage name, Pola Negri, and also lied about her age, claiming to be 17 when she was likely only 14. At the drama school, she began to show her unwavering focus and determination. These qualities led her classmates to bully her harshly because she appeared uninterested in their common goal of marrying at the first opportunity. They even tied her to a fence using her long black curls and tormented her for her independent-minded nature. Despite this, she made her acting debut in Poland as an ingenue at the Rozmaitoczy Theater. She won some impressive reviews in local theater papers, especially for her roles as Hedwig in Ibsen's Wild Duck and the lead in Gerhard Hauptmann's Hannele. These successful appearances led her to be invited to make films in Poland's primitive film industry, and her movie debut is assumed to have been in 1914 in a movie titled Niewolnica Znywlów, usually translated as Slave of Sin or Slave of Her Senses. This film, directed by Ryszard Ordyński, was all shot on the roof of a building and used natural lighting. It also gave Pola a role that would be somewhat prophetic. Pola portrayed a beautiful yet impoverished daughter of a locksmith. She becomes a famous dancer, and this all goes to her head as she leaves her fiancé and runs off with a wealthy admirer. However, her former fiancé is furious and decides to enact his revenge on the Slave of Sin. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this film is long lost with little hope of a copy ever being discovered. However, at the time of its release, the salaciously titled picture was somewhat of a sensation. From here, Pola quickly rose to becoming a leading star in Poland. During this time, she appeared in Max Reinhardt's famous stage pantomime, Sumeran, first in Poland and later in Berlin, where she decided to settle. Her exit from Warsaw coincided with the general evacuation of the city, as the fighting between Russia and Germany closed ominously in on the city. Upon her arrival in Berlin in 1917, she made several films, including some very popular comedy shorts. Berlin was one of the leading cities in the world for cinema at that time, equaled only by Paris in Europe. For the next 5 years, she dominated the German film industry and also thrilled audiences with her stage acting. She had conquered Berlin, and the next stop for Pola would be another, even more exciting world. The most important moment in her career was her meeting with the Ernst Lubitsch. Lubitsch was a graduate of Max Reinhardt's avant-garde Deutsches Theater and had been applying these radical new ideas to both his acting and, in recent years, directing. He was an exciting new talent, about to make a breakthrough. Together, Negri and Lubitsch made several films in Berlin, including, which turned out to be the big break for both of them, The Eyes of the Mummy. This dramatic horror film absolutely thrilled European audiences, with Pola playing the reincarnation of the mummified Queen Ma. This, it is worth noting, was some 4 years before Howard Carter unearthed the tomb of Tutankhamun, and so it appeared well before mummy mania swept the world. And it was one of the first horror films to portray ancient Egypt. Luckily, the film is intact and was digitally restored back in 2002 by TCM, if you want to check it out. After this, they also made Carmen in 1918, a bandit drama film which was released in the US as Gypsy Blood, no doubt hoping to cash in on Pola's claims to be of gypsy descent. Gypsy Blood didn't make it onto American screens until 1921, when it was released alongside two more of his films, both of which were historical dramas: Madame du Barry, which was retitled as Passion, and Anne Boleyn, although the latter did not feature Pola. All three films were on the New York Times list of the 15 most important films of 1921. Meanwhile, that year, Lubitsch and Negri made the filmed adaptation of Cimarron, where both Negri and Lubitsch reprised their stage roles in what was also Lubitsch's last ever acting role. They also made The Wildcat in 1921, and finally Die Flamme, known as Montmartre in the United States in 1922. With the release of Gypsy Blood, Passion, and Cimarron, retitled One Arabian Night for American audiences, Lubitsch and Negri radically altered American cinema. When these films premiered in America, viewers were blown away by Negri's potent sexuality, her explicit love scenes, and her undeniable cinematic magnetism. Lubitsch was also one of the greatest geniuses of cinema, and so the combination was a kind of perfect alchemy. One critic at the time described Pola as being all slink and mink, while another remarked, "You had the feeling that the back of her neck was dirty." This comment rather clumsily attempted to convey that Pola had an earthy quality to her. She was not ethereal, pure, and angelic, in the way many American actresses of the time were portrayed. She was very much a real woman, and a highly sensual one at that. Whatever her essence, Pola understood very well how to market herself. She mastered the front page and was also the embodiment of the allure of European sensibility that so fascinated Americans of the era. Europe was an understandably confusing place for a lot of Americans at that time. Glamorous, sophisticated, and daringly free in thoughts and behavior, all the while using advanced machines to murder each other by the millions, in the grimmest spectacle the world had yet witnessed. Pola represented this dangerous, exciting foreignness. In other words, she was extremely exciting to American moviegoers. One scene in Passion caused plenty of ruffled feathers in New York after the initial screenings. While Negri, as the infamous courtesan Madame du Barry, lounges sensually on her lavish bed, King Louis can be seen slipping her tiny shoes on and off. She refuses to get up until her footwear is properly adjusted, which means that no lesser person than the King of France, the most powerful man in the world in the era the film is set, has to do the task. He not only puts on her shoes, but kisses her feet and calves, even licking one of her toes. Then he even clips her nails. Needless to say, such highly suggestive and borderline perverse scenes were hardly common in films at the time. The promotional material for Passion declared Pola Negri and a cast of 5,000 people in Passion, a mighty epic of the screen. This is the story of a Wonder Woman, the world's most daring adventuress. They were not entirely exaggerating. Today, this film is mainly recognized as the key project that established Negri as an American star. It is still respected for its thrilling action sequences, richly detailed sets and costumes, and sophisticated visual presentation. Furthermore, it set the stage for German cinema to influence Hollywood's golden age. But it almost never saw a release at all. After World War I, German films were banned in the United States. However, Passion was cleverly marketed as a European film rather than a German one, and Lubitsch's name was omitted. Following its huge success, the industry changed its tune and began to welcome many talented German filmmakers to America. As for Pola, after these three big hits of 1921, her life was about to change dramatically, and a new world was opening up to her. Before any of that could take place, her romantic life was about to hit a crisis. Back in 1919, Pola ran into trouble when border officials detained her while traveling between Warsaw and Berlin. Upset by the holdup, she insisted on meeting the agent's superior. The officials complied and brought her to see him. She was riled up and preparing to get angry. However, upon seeing the commander, Count Eugene Dobsky, her rage vanished. His striking good looks left her momentarily speechless, and she exclaimed, "My God, I love him." After Dobsky resolved her bureaucratic troubles, she rewarded him by agreeing to a date. Following this chance meeting, they exchanged letters, and this physical attraction turned into love. After a whirlwind romance, the Count proposed to her. Overjoyed and infatuated with him, Negri eagerly accepted the opportunity to become a real countess. She married Dabski at St. Mary's Assumption Church in Sosnowiec on November 5, 1919, officially becoming Countess Apollonia Dabski Halopiec. Unfortunately, her marriage was not exactly the fairy tale she had envisioned. Negri realized she should have taken more time to understand the Count before tying the knot. They turned out to be completely incompatible. He was frequently away and had very few interests in life beyond his work. Although he appeared gallant and honorable, his behavior in private was quite different. As Negri later stated, "In bed I was not his wife sharing the pleasures of marriage. I was simply an object at which he hurled his passion." This was not the great seduction that she had expected from an aristocrat. The self-assured Negri knew her value and was aware when her husband failed to respect it. So she left the brutish Count and began a relationship with German millionaire Wolfgang Georg Schlieber. Schlieber introduced her to a more luxurious lifestyle and was a far more attentive lover. However, Count Dabski did not take her betrayal lightly. Upon learning of her departure, some sources claim he confronted her with a gun, demanding she give up acting and remain in the marriage. Negri, afraid for her life, agreed. She bided her time until he fell asleep, then caught the next train to Berlin. The timing of her escape coincided perfectly with the U.S. release of Passion, and this only added further fuel to the already scandalous backdrop of the film's stunning leading lady. After the successful release of these films in Europe, both Lubitsch and Negri received invitations to work in America. Pola was savvy and took her time to consider which studio to join, and this increased the financial offers on the table as they fought for her signature. Ultimately, she decided on Paramount, which offered her a hefty salary of $3,000 a week, which instantly put her among the highest-paid stars in Hollywood. It was said that she met fellow silent film star Mabel Normand on the voyage to America, and the two quickly became friends. This friendship may seem unusual, but it is easy to forget that Pola, like Mabel, had a background in slapstick comedies. And wherever she went, Pola seemed to attract friendships. Although she was often paradoxically described as a loner, people generally enjoyed her company. On the voyage, her agent was worried about her spending too much time in her cabin and encouraged her to make more appearances for publicity's sake. But Pola knew what she was doing. She told her agent, "All you have to do is to say you want to be alone, and the whole world thinks you are exotic and glamorous." On the other hand, this excessive solitary time likely stemmed from her recent divorce and the loss of her title as countess, coupled with the fact that Schlieber had left her for another woman just before the trip. He had informed her of his breakup by simply failing to show up for their planned romantic getaway in Paris. This left her doubly heartbroken. Pretty soon, she found some elaborate and expensive distractions. When Pola finally made her entrance into Hollywood, she cranked everything up to 11 in terms of glamour. She bought a stunning white Rolls-Royce, upholstered in white velvet and adorned with ivory door handles and dashboard. During her drives, she would lay a large white fur rug across her lap and take along her 2 white Russian wolfhounds, each resting by her side. Her chauffeur wore an all-white uniform, except when it rained, in which case he would appear in black. Negri wrapped herself in luxurious ermine, chinchilla, and mink, draping herself in sparkling diamonds, rubies, and emeralds, as she sat up straight in the back seat, staring straight ahead and stopping traffic wherever she went. She also had a pet tiger on a leash, which she often paraded down Sunset Boulevard. Her dressing room featured exclusively Chinese decor, and she required fresh orchid petals to be scattered on the floor each day. Her wardrobe was mind-blowing, consisting only of either black silk, black velvet, or sable, or the total opposite, white silk, white chiffon, and ermine. She also popularized the now famous trend of women painting their toenails fire engine red. The men she pursued included some of Hollywood's biggest names, and the first big romance she embarked on was with Charlie Chaplin. Negri had met Chaplin while in Germany, and what started as a friendship soon turned into an affair that was of huge interest to the media. A lot of stories were speculation about a possible marriage, and the headlines ran, "The Queen of Tragedy to wed the King of Comedy." The relationship would run for a while, but no marriage ever came of it. Negri made her American film debut in Belladonna in 1923, directed by George Fitzmaurice. She starred alongside Conway Tyrrell, Conrad Nagel, and Adolphe Menjou. For the debut of this prominent European star, famous players spared no expense. They provided her with elaborate costumes and positioned her at the center of the film's story. The plot revolved around a woman who leaves her British husband for an Egyptian tycoon, who ultimately rejects her after a brief flirtation. In the film, Negri finds herself rowing a boat to the desert, where she struggles across the sand, all the while escaping from tigers and jackals. As Variety sarcastically pointed out, what a tiger or jackal or Negri was doing in that part of the desert just then is the picture stuff, but the animal must have gotten her out there in her semi-evening clothes. There must have been 3 or 4 barrels of sand used for the storm, also 1 camel, and Pola knows how to get off a camel, even if the picture doesn't show her getting on. Pola's next American film was a remake of Cecil B. DeMille's hit, The Cheat, also directed by George Fitzmaurice. This time, the man who brands the wayward society woman was a Hindu instead of a Japanese character, but the storyline remained largely unchanged. According to Variety, the audience at the Rivoli laughed at it. While the sets and costumes received plenty of praise for their sumptuousness, Negri was noted to, quote, throw upon the screen a distinctly hard personality. Negri had a better time with her final 1923 film, The Spanish Dancer, where she was described as fiery and flashing. Directed by Herbert Brennan, this release coincided with Lubitsch's first American film, Rosita, which starred Mary Pickford. In The Spanish Dancer, it was clear that Negri had a background in dance, as she moved with a real grace and physical expressiveness. Her beauty was also very evident, and her large eyes conveyed a wide array of emotions. The film's stunning cinematography came courtesy of the legendary James Wong Howe, who was still credited as James Howe at the time. Overall, it was a top-notch production, with grand sets, dozens of extras, and some very impressive crowd scenes. In 1924, Pola's career continued upwards, and she was given more roles that befitted a Paramount star, that is to say, as grand and beautiful as silent cinema ever got. Negri starred in Shadows of Paris, Men, Lily of the Dust, and Forbidden Paradise through 1924. In Shadows of Paris, she embodied the classic woman's film narrative, starting as a girl in an Apache den in Paris and rising to wealth as the mistress of a mansion. To begin, she appeared in a checked skirt, a tight top, and a cheap feathered hat. Later, she transformed into a vision of the latest Parisian fashion, dripping with jewels. Then, in Men, which Variety picked out as, quote, box office surefire, she reunited with Dmitry Bohovetsky, one of her directors from her Polish film days. Feeling comfortable with her fellow countrymen, Negri delivered a strong performance and received excellent reviews once more. This was yet another rags to riches story, in which a naive country girl winds up finding herself the toast of the town, as usual wearing the finest clothing Paris could muster. Pola took to these roles like a duck to water, not surprising given how closely they mirrored her actual life. In Lily of the Dust, adapted from Herman Sutterman's The Song of Songs, Negri worked with Buchovetsky again, who, aside from Lubitsch, was without a doubt her finest director. And it was another hit. Critics were starting to show her more respect, and Pola was proving her genuine ability to act. The New York Times wrote about how quickly she could express a range of emotions, including, as they put it, anxiety, affection, nervousness, interest, pleasure, and despair. Her eyes are soft and, as usual, wonderfully expressive. While these films were hits, Pola's standout performance in 1924 came with Forbidden Paradise, which brought her back together with Lubitsch. She portrayed the royal character Catherine, a role that suited her perfectly. The film featured a strong cast including the handsome Rod LaRocque as her lover Alexei, Adolphe Menjou as a charming chancellor, and Pauline Stark as the innocent young woman who loves Alexei. This film combined comedy, romance, and intrigue seamlessly, and Negri rose to the occasion, receiving some of her best reviews. Variety wrote, "If ever a star did good work, Pola Negri does it here." Rod LaRocque, who plays her leading man, was a perfect match for Negri. He was tall and attractive, tall enough to require her to stand on a small stool to give him a royal kiss. Their on-screen chemistry translated into a very public romance during the filming. Critics were coming around to her, but the public were already hypnotized by Pola. Fan magazines latched onto glamorous Pola early on, as she seemed tailor-made for them. A lengthy article by Henry Carr in Motion Picture from June 1923 described her as a wild wind who doesn't calculate, couldn't tell you how she does it because she just does it. The piece also wrote about her arrival in Hollywood, noting that she came, quote, with the hauteur of an empress and possessed a quality that few American actresses had, power. Back in those days, photoplay had a feature on character nose readings, which attempted to discern the real personality of celebrities by reading the shape of their noses. They suggested that Pola Negri's nose indicated a strong, domineering personality, one that was, as they had it, vital and wild, with executive ability and a keen sensitivity to art, as well as being bold and resolute. In contrast, Gloria Swanson's nose was said to reveal strength of character, luxury-loving, and a quick mind and ready wit, while also being shy and suspicious. Yet another article poetically called Pola an exotic sorceress, living a crepe Georgette existence. Pola was also prominently featured in studio advertisements. She was referred to as the Magnificent Wildcat, and a tiger woman with a strange, slow smile, and world-old lure in her heavy-lidded eyes, mysterious, fascinating, an enigma. Much of this promotional material targeted female audiences, and was focused on the beauty of Negri's costumes and romantic nature of her love scenes. They also promoted her daring spirit and independence. She was described as all fire and passion that speaks of the perfumed orient of smoldering passions and hidden storms. The studio consistently released updates about her temperamental moments, emotional outbursts, and hysterics. Many younger women in her audience may have found themselves secretly cheering her on. They likely identified with her refusal to conform at a time when society was shifting at a rapid pace. If Pola didn't get her way, she at least made sure everyone noticed. On the other hand, for male viewers, she was marketed as the most fascinating love actress in the world. Pola had plenty to say herself, and did not hold back in giving what were considered highly controversial opinions at that time. For example, in one interview she proclaimed, "I do not believe in marriage. It is not for me. I am selfish. No, not selfish, for I have sacrificed everything for love. I am independent. Freedom comes before anything. I am a gypsy, like my father." All of this publicity wasn't enough for the studios, however. By 1924, they had become wise to the value of a good scandal, and nothing caught the public attention like a feud between two heavyweight stars. So with this in mind, the greatest feud of the 1920s was born, Negri versus Swanson. Her feud with Swanson was legendary. Both were divas of the highest order. Swanson dominated the Paramount lot, while Negri was known for berating her directors, aside from Lubitsch, for not taking enough close-ups. There was a well-known impression of Negri going around Los Angeles at the time, with a line that became synonymous with her behavior. She would, so it was said, storm over to the director mid-scene and in her extremely thick Polish accent, demand, "Make the big face, make the big head." The rivalry between Swanson and Negri became so intense in the media that it turned the idea of a catfight into something far more literal. Swanson had a well-known aversion to cats, a fact thoroughly reported by the ever-curious fan magazines. Negri was portrayed as an animal lover. After all, she did have a pet tiger on a leash. The publicity department at Famous Players Lasky quickly turned this into a rivalry revenge tale. They claimed that Pola had unleashed a multitude of cats of various colors and sizes onto Gloria's set, which forced Gloria to scamper away, frightened and fainting. However, this was a bridge too far for Swanson. She didn't mind the publicity, but the idea a few cats could put her off was ridiculous to her. "Me, afraid of cats?" she scoffed. "Didn't I let the king of beasts rest a paw on my back in male and female? Really, they'll have to do better than that." The two stars also vied to see who could claim the highest royal title. Negri's background as a former countess was well known, and this apparently stirred Swanson's competitive spirit. She ultimately outdid Negri by marrying a French marquis in 1925. The press published endless stories of this nature about the ongoing rivalry between the two, but much of it was fabricated. One of Negri's friends later described it as a melange of cooked-up jealousies and quarrels. The press and studio continued to push the narrative, but neither Negri nor Swanson fell for it. Although they never became friends, they were not outright enemies either. Those close to them said that both women tended to refrain from commenting on each other, and they were polite whenever they crossed paths. When asked, both denied the existence of any feud, and Pola reiterated the point several times in her memoirs. Years later, Swanson reflected on how absurd the whole situation had been. She stated, "I'm not a stupid woman, and I hope I have common sense. Someone wrote that Pola and I always tried to see who could make a later entrance to a party. What did I do? Sit outside in an automobile until she went in first? Or be in cahoots with the butler who would call me up and say, 'She's arrived, now you can come over'? I never heard such nonsense in my life." In any case, Negri perhaps had the last laugh when Billy Wilder asked her to play Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard. She reportedly threw Wilder out of her house at the perceived insult. Swanson, by that time, could not afford to turn the role down. At the same time, Pola's affair with Charlie Chaplin was coming to an end, and the press was buzzing with claims that she had jilted him. As usual, Pola did not hold back in her critique of the relationship, describing Chaplin as an inept lover who was unable to meet her sexual needs. In her autobiography, she said, "A great deal has been written about my relationship with Charlie Chaplin. Unfortunately, much of it was written by Mr. Chaplin. Charlie shares something with a great many comedians, a total lack of a sense of humor about his private life. It was all so many years ago. It impresses me as phenomenal that his vanity is still so wounded that he cannot see some of the comic aspects of what happened between us." 1925 should have been the peak of her career, and yet it was underwhelming. Suddenly, Paramount seemed to lose track of the formula that worked best for her, and were dropping her into lesser roles. In this year, Negri starred in East of Suez, The Charmer, Flower of Night, and Woman of the World. Then the following year, she appeared in Crown of Lies and Good and Naughty. Many of these films featured weak and silly plots that did not allow her to show her genuine dramatic talent. An exception was Woman of the World, which was directed in an elegant European style by Mal St. Clair. Based on Carl van Vechten's novel, The Tattooed Countess, the film depicted Pola as the quintessential countess, complete with a skull and butterfly tattoo above her wrist. She strolled through the scenes, dragging a 10-foot chinchilla train behind her glittering gown. This decline in film quality was a familiar narrative for Hollywood actors and continues to be relevant today. The struggle between maintaining artistic integrity and adhering to societal norms has constrained Hollywood almost since its beginnings. While there have been rare periods of creative freedom, particularly in the early 1930s and late 1960s, these moments of innovation have often been stifled. Hollywood has repeatedly returned to its formula of placing stars in unsuitable roles or low-quality productions in hopes of achieving box office success. Pola's films from 1926 were no exception to this trend. Another prominent star whose career was on the rocks was Rudolph Valentino, the biggest male star of the era. By early 1926, he had already passed the peak of his career. Having recently gone through a divorce, Valentino struggled with several lackluster films that tarnished the reputation he had earned after the massive success of The Sheik. Rudy and Pola were said to have met for the first time in 1926 at a costume party hosted by Marion Davies. Rudy attended dressed as his character from Blood and Sand, while Pola came in the attire of an officer of the Guard for Catherine the Great. According to reports, Pola requested Alla Nazimova to introduce her to Rudy. Sparks flew and they quickly arranged for a private meeting later that evening, with an instant attraction evident between them. In her memoirs, she recalled that she found him so passionately overpowering that he covered his bed in rose petals for her, and they made love throughout the night. Was their romance just a publicity stunt? Perhaps to some extent. Pola was certainly eager to engage in love affairs that made headlines. But Rudy appeared to be a bit more reserved, even though he often let his romantic interests take charge. They were frequently spotted together, engaging in various activities, and both wore smiles that were rarely seen in other candid photos. Perhaps they were simply so in love that they wished to share their joy with their fans. Frustrated with the lack of quality roles in Hollywood, Pola planned to return to Germany for 4 months to revive her career. However, Rudy would not accompany her. Pola made a grand declaration about her relationship with Valentino, calling their 4 months apart as a supreme test of love. Unfortunately, this test would end tragically. In August 1926, Valentino unexpectedly collapsed. Doctors quickly rushed him into surgery, and the initial outlook was promising. However, his condition took a turn for the worse, and he ultimately passed away from a perforated ulcer at the young age of 31. When Negri received the news, she fainted in her hotel room. As the world mourned with her, the public reaction to Valentino's death was one of mass hysteria, and there were riots at his funeral in New York. Pola hurried from Hollywood to attend the funeral, but her behavior there did not endear her to Valentino's grieving fans. She posed dramatically for reporters and then threw herself, sobbing and fainting onto Valentino's open casket, a move that caused chaos among the mourners. Pola then accompanied Rudy's body back to Hollywood by train for another funeral, making stops in major cities from New York to Hollywood. At each stop, she willingly posed for reporters, repeating her dramatic displays of grief on command. At Valentino's Hollywood funeral, she ordered an extravagant array of red roses, costing $2,000, with her name, Pola, displayed prominently in white roses at the center. Pola was never one for the art of understatement. Her melodramatic grief was once again on full display at the Hollywood service, and was further elaborated upon for Photoplay magazine, which reported her intention to place an enormous marble wedding cake atop Valentino's tomb. Thankfully, this plan did not come to fruition. While this certainly did not impress those who were in attendance, it was in fact a more subtle gesture that she made which may, according to some, have been the one that doomed her life and career from this point on. In an effort to consummate her so-called marriage to Valentino, she slipped a ring from his dead finger and placed it on her own. The ring, it turned out, might have had some terrible effect on her life, but more on that a little later. Meanwhile, before we get back to the tragic outcome for Pola, we'd love to ask you to subscribe if you enjoy the videos. We are, for some reason, hugely undersubscribed among our regular viewers, and so if you enjoy watching, then hitting the subscribe button is a surefire way of getting the algorithm on our good side. After Valentino's passing, many people believe that the mysterious woman in black, who visited Valentino's grave every year, was Pola Negri. They figured that only someone like her would think of such a dramatic gesture and have the boldness to carry it out year after year. However, it turned out that this woman was not actually Pola, although it wouldn't be a stretch to say she might have been inspired by her. Despite the theatrics surrounding their relationship, Valentino and Negri shared some real affection and down-to-earth moments together. One of her most memorable quotes about their romance was a simple yet personal memory. He loved to make spaghetti and meatballs. He had his own special recipe. I never tired of it, and I will never share with anyone else the secret of his meat sauce. This statement certainly deserves a place in the history books. The image of Pola Negri and Rudolph Valentino sitting at home, enjoying a bowl of homemade spaghetti while dressed in the finest jewels and silks that haute couture has to offer, is quite something. Her heartbreak led to a fast rebound, as in 1927 Pola Negri married again. This time her husband was a Georgian noble who referred to himself as Prince Serge Midvani, although he was not actually a prince. Negri and Midvani tied the knot on May 14, 1927, just months after Valentino's death. Shortly after their wedding, she became pregnant. Having always dreamed of being a mother, Pola began to take better care of her health and even contemplated stepping back from her film career to focus on being a housewife and mother. Unfortunately, she suffered a miscarriage, and she mourned the loss of her child for the rest of her life. Midvani's family was known as the Marrying Midvanis, due to their strategy of leveraging their minor nobility to attract wealthy partners. Negri fell into this category, and by 1929 her fortune was estimated at a staggering $5 million. However, the stock market crash that year nearly wiped out her wealth, which seemed to alter Midvani's feelings towards her. The couple divorced on April 2, 1931. To complicate her financial situation further, a painter sued her for unpaid fees after creating a portrait of her that included Valentino's ghost in the background. It was clear that she was still mourning the great lover. In her 1970 autobiography, Memoirs of a Star, Pola insisted that despite her many relationships, Valentino remained the love of her life. She wrote, "My love for Valentino was the greatest love of my life. I loved him not as one artist loves another, but as a woman loves a man." 1927's Hotel Imperial, directed by Moritz Stiller, who is known as Garbo Svengali, was a beautifully made film. Pola looked stunning in it, although her beauty was not her only asset. More than her physical appearance, she possessed a face full of character. When she smiled, her face lit up, and her expressive eyes always reflected her character's emotions and situations. This power was on full display in Hotel Imperial, and Stiller clearly understood how to get the best out of her. She would follow this with another success in what seemed to be something of a comeback, although no doubt she would have loathed that particular word as much as Norma Desmond, so let's call it a return. This next film, Barbed Wire, was skillfully directed by Roland V. Lee. This film stands out as one of the most powerful narratives about World War I produced in the 1920s, especially for its precocious anti-war message. However, the reviews for Negri's performance were not entirely favorable, but the negative press was primarily political. Apparently, taken aback by the film's perceived pro-German sentiment, some reviews had the knives out, but the fact remains it is one of her finest films. Things were seemingly on the up, but then the technological revolution that would change cinema forever arrived, and many stars were about to be cast aside. As the prospect of sound began to loom over the silent film landscape, actors grew anxious. There was no certainty that their skills would adapt well to talking pictures, even for those who had been born and raised in America. Even the false idea that an actor had a weak voice could be enough to devastate a life and a career, as was the case with John Gilbert, who you can hear all about in our video on his tragic life, linked on screen now and in the description below. For those with heavy foreign accents, the future appeared particularly bleak. Despite this uncertainty, Negri managed to release 4 more silent films as the medium went through its death throes: The Secret Hour, 3 Sinners, Loves of an Actress, and The Woman from Moscow. These films were more or less in line with her previous work. Following these releases, she suddenly stopped acting, making only one part-talkie in England, titled The Woman He Scorned, which came out in America in 1930 and received poor reviews. Was this a case of her trying to generate some mystery before disappearing? It's not easy to say, as she almost completely disappeared from view during these years. She remained off the screen until 1932, when she finally made her official sound film debut in A Woman Commands. This project was heavily promoted, and she attended the premiere in New York City with Mayor Jimmy Walker by her side. While staying at the Ambassador Hotel in New York in April 1932, Negri performed alongside Russ Columbo in George Jessel's Variety Review at the Schubert Theater, and they briefly dated. After the premiere of A Woman Commands in Hollywood, Columbo dedicated his performance of her signature song, Paradise, to her. He also recorded the song as a 78 RPM single that year, with some altered lyrics, and it became a major hit across the country. At the premiere, Pola looked stunning in an all-white ensemble, adorned with a magnificent tiara perched atop her dark hair. However, the quality of the film itself left much to be desired. One review described it as a clumsy mix of a musicalized Zenda and a weak attempt at continental elegance. Ultimately, the film was deemed confusing, with a chaotic mashup of torch songs, Tsarist revolution, steamy romance, Ruritanian court intrigue, and lowbrow comedy. Like Greta Garbo, her accent was noticeable. However, unlike Garbo, she was not moving with the times. Her glamorous image, complete with furs, jewels, and silk shoes, along with her portrayals of gypsies, Serenas, and Apache crime queens, simply did not resonate in the harsh realities of the 1930s. In contrast to the tough working-class women and gun moles of that era, Pola's dramatic outbursts no longer appeared as acts of defiance or liberation. Essentially, her American film career was nearing its end. Nevertheless, the promotion surrounding A Woman Commands ensured that she exited the scene with her characteristic flair and glamour. After this, Pola Negri simply evaporated from Hollywood, like a ghost who had never really been there in the first place. Many have speculated why her decline was so extreme. Unlike stars like Gilbert and Barbara Lamar, she was not beset by severe addiction. However, like Lamar, she did battle through some serious and highly mysterious health problems. Doctors did not know what was wrong with her through the late 1920s, although her brush with TB earlier could have been the underlying cause. However, the most tantalizing rumor has long been the admittedly outlandish idea that the ring she plucked from Valentino's finger was cursed. Today, in the vault of a Los Angeles bank, lies a silver ring set with a semi-precious stone. This ring is not particularly beautiful or valuable, depending on who tells the story. However, it is unlikely that anyone would dare to wear it again. The ring is said to carry one of the most infamous curses in the world of the occult. Its successive owners have experienced injuries, misfortunes, and even deaths. Many still believe that this very ring was responsible for sending Rudolph Valentino to his early grave. The violent events surrounding the ring over the past 100 years can hardly be dismissed as coincidence. In 1920, Valentino was at the height of his fame when he discovered the ring in a jewelry store in San Francisco. The shopkeeper warned him about the ring's history of bad luck, but Valentino decided to purchase it anyway. He wore it during the filming of The Young Raja, a movie that has since been lost. This film turned out to be the biggest flop of his career, leading to a 2-year hiatus from the screen. Valentino did not wear the ring again until he used it as a costume prop in Son of the Sheik. Just 3 weeks after completing that film, he traveled to New York wearing the ring. He was wearing it at the time he was struck down with the illness that killed him. Pola then slipped the ring onto her finger during her infamous funeral performance, and shortly thereafter she went through a long period of ill health that coincided with the decline of her acting career. Then, while she was filming A Woman Commands, she met crooner Russ Columbo, as I mentioned earlier. Columbo also bore a striking resemblance to Valentino. Pola was so taken by his likeness to Valentino that during their brief affair, she gifted him the ring, saying, "From one Valentino to another." Just a short while after receiving the gift, Russ Columbo tragically died in a bizarre shooting accident. From this point, the ring changed hands several times, and each of its wearers ended up dying in tragic circumstances. It's a little outside the scope of this video to detail the full story of the ring, but for those of you who are interested, we have a recent post over on Patreon for our Hollywood Histories members that details the whole ring saga, so to speak, in a full-length illustrated essay. You can also access all of our Hollywood Histories content by joining us as a YouTube member on that tier. It costs just $3 a month, and there are weekly Hollywood essays and plenty of our other content available, so feel free to check it out. And of course, it's an enormous help to me when it comes to improving the quality of the videos. Intermission over, let's get back to Pola. After this point, Pola found herself without any film offers at all, so she decided to return to Europe. She made a film in France and then went back to UFA in Germany in 1935. There she starred in a series of solid films and also enjoyed some success as a cabaret singer. At this time, rumors began to emerge about her alleged romantic involvement with Adolf Hitler, who was known to be a fan of Pola's. However, these claims were dismissed by Negri's wardrobe mistress, who pithily remarked, "Miss Negri is herself a dictator. She would never take orders from Hitler." As World War II loomed, she returned to the United States. During this period, she became close friends with Margaret West, an oil heiress and former radio star whom she had originally met in the 1930s. The two women became housemates, sharing a beachfront home in Los Angeles along with Negri's 88-year-old mother. Later, they moved to Bel Air. Pola, a devout Catholic throughout her life, spent her days fundraising for Catholic charities alongside her mother and West. After returning to Hollywood, she appeared in only one film, a light-hearted comedy titled Hi Diddle Diddle, released in 1943. On January 12, 1951, Negri became a naturalized citizen of the United States. Following the death of her mother from pancreatic cancer in 1954, she and West moved in 1957 from Los Angeles to a suite in the Menger Hotel in San Antonio, Texas, and later to a larger home in Olmos Park. Negri lived with West until the latter's death from heart failure in 1963, at which point she inherited a portion of West's considerable fortune. Her biographers have long speculated on whether or not Pola was bisexual and romantically involved with West or not, but there is no clear answer. It was certainly an unusual arrangement at the time, but Pola never made mention of any love affair with West in any of her writings. In 1964, she made an unexpected return to the screen in Walt Disney's The Moonspinners. The film starred the popular young actress Hayley Mills, and Pola was encouraged to come out of retirement from her home in Houston, Texas. She took on a small but memorable role as Madame Habib, a jewel thief residing on a lavish yacht named the Minotaur. Though her scenes were brief, she made the most of her screen time. In her salon, which resembled a grand silent film set, Egyptian and Asian artifacts adorned the space, and naturally, a cheetah lounged on a plush stool. Pola always knew how to attract attention. To generate buzz for the film, she made a splash while staying at a luxurious hotel in London, appearing for the press with her cheetah co-star on a leash. In her final film, she delivered a striking farewell performance just before she and her big cat settled down for a nap. After betraying the villain she had once allied with, she calmly states, "Everyone lies when it suits their purpose, even the stars." This was a fitting tribute to Pola's own life, her previous roles, and her distinctive persona. In her later years, Negri found herself childless and increasingly alone. She reflected on her life and often questioned, what to do with time, what to do with my life. Yet she also expressed a poignant sentiment. The past was wonderful. It was youth and exhilaration. I would not have missed it for worlds. The present is tranquil. It is age and a little wisdom. I am grateful to have survived long enough to have experienced it. Pola Negri passed away on August 1st, 1987, at the age of 90 in the Northeast Baptist Hospital in San Antonio, Texas. Her death was attributed to pneumonia, which had led to her hospitalization a week prior. Additionally, she had been battling a brain tumor for 2 years, a condition she had declined to treat. During her wake at the Porter Loring Funeral Home in San Antonio, her body was displayed in a stunning yellow chiffon dress, complemented by a matching golden turban. She was as fabulous and glamorous in death as she had been during those glory years in which she lit up the silver screen. That's about all we have on Pola. If you enjoyed, we'd love a comment from you, or otherwise a like, a share, or simply subscribing so you can catch the next video. There's one every Saturday, so be sure to tune in. And finally, we have this brand new exclusive Pola Negri t-shirt and sticker set now available in our store. It might not be made from chiffon and the finest silk, but it's still a very classy shirt in our opinion. Why not show the world your love for Pola and get yourself an early Christmas present? Until next week, that's all from me. Sweet dreams.